One of the most humble experiences of my life was indeed rejoining the military at 50 to become a military peacekeeping commander in Kosovo, in former Yugoslavia. Having been out of the service for 22 years, my military knowledge was initially outdated, and my team knew so much more than I did. Yet, I was their commander. So I asked myself, how do I lead a team if they know so much more than I do? How do I lead a team of tech-savvy millennials who will be at times geographically dispersed all over Kosovo, who could be my children? How do I best lead in an environment that is a post-war region, volatile, ever-changing, and complex? I didn't know it at the time, but I intuitively practice what I do now call humble leadership. I made a point out of sitting down with each of my team members and with members up and down the whole peacekeeping force with no other agenda to learn about them as a person. It really helps that I love people, but these meetings had a clear business purpose. I knew that if I would build trust, close relationships, open communication, it would be much easier for us to rely on each other when the famous stuff would hit the fan, as it inevitably would. My leadership during my 9 months was by no means perfect. I made plenty of mistakes. But my team proved to be highly adaptable, had a clear shared purpose, and felt empowered to make frontline decisions and execute at the front lines. As a result, we fulfilled the mission to the fullest satisfaction of our commanders and reported 0 incidences. And one thing, in all humility, I'm very proud of, at the end of our 9 months together, my team members, each one of them looked me in the eye and said, "Captain Koenig, with you anytime again." I am very proud of, I have to say. The lessons I've learned leading my team in Kosovo proved invaluable to me at the time, and I spent the last 1.5 years since coming back in translating those lessons to the world of business. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. I will talk briefly about the VUCA world, and then I will outline what I believe the 3 things organizations need to deliver in order to win in a VUCA world, and then the 5 behaviors of humble leaders in support of these 3 things. So 1 world, 3 things, 5 behaviors. Easy enough. Let's go to the pub and have a few beers, right? We're done. Let's start. On April 9th, 2017, who remembers this incident? Yes. Dr. David Dauduai was injured while being forcefully removed from a fully boarded, sold-out United Express plane at which airport? Chicago O'Hare. To make room for a United employee who needed to be flown to a different destination to start his shift. In the process, security officers struck Daw's face and dragged him, apparently unconscious, down the aircraft aisle, all past the rows of onlooking passengers. What happened then? Social media lit up immediately with the incident. Politicians asked for an official investigation. President Trump called United's treatment of its customer horrible. Warren Buffett stated United made a horrible mistake. What many of you probably don't know, as a result of the incident, the CEO of United Airlines, Oscar Muniz, was denied a previously planned promotion to chairman as a result of this incident. This is our new world. Frontline employees, who by the way are not even United employees, but security officers, taking actions, making decisions, the whole thing getting broadcasted to the whole world, and your clients, our clients, potential clients, making decisions to buy or not to buy, based on what they see or read. Think about this. The holder of the highest office of this country chiming in. Warren Buffett chiming in. And it all costing the CEO the promotion to chairman. 10, 15 years ago, unthinkable. I'm telling you this story not to argue for or against the denied promotion of the CEO, but simply to illustrate the increased speed and messiness and interconnectedness of today's world. And now I'm going to talk briefly about this world we're facing. Volatile. Challenges are unexpected and of unknown duration. Okay, so this is volatile. Price fluctuations after one of your suppliers goes out of business. That's volatility. Uncertainty. Change may or may not happen. I was speaking to a group of business owners who were playing in the healthcare space, And they have a ton of uncertainty in terms of what legislation is getting passed on Capitol Hill or is not getting passed. Lots of uncertainty. Complex, not complicated. Chess is a complicated game, but it's still linear. Here we're talking complexity, non-linear interactions. Complexity is doing business in 30 different countries with ever-changing legislation, tariffs, and cultural norms. And of course, ambiguous. The unknown unknowns. No precedent exists. Launching a product or a business in an emerging market. It's the business fog of war. What does fog of war mean? It's the complexity and the overwhelming information facing soldiers and commanders on the battlefield, which makes it impossible or incredibly difficult to make good decisions. Where we used to have weeks and months to analyze a situation. Remember strategic planning back then? Analyze a situation, develop a plan of action, communicate the plan of action, execute it. Today, far-reaching decisions are being made by our frontline employees, who, by the way, are 8 time zones removed from you, 4 levels of hierarchy removed from you, speak a different mother tongue, grew up in a different culture, and by the way, they're millennials, and they really work for a bigger purpose than just for a paycheck. How are we as leaders responding to this new world? I argue not very well indeed. While the world is becoming increasingly FUCA, we're still designing our organizations in the linear, mechanical, Taylor School of Business way. We emphasize efficient silos over resilient adaptability. How about how we lead? Has that kept up? I would argue, once again, no. We're still stuck in the outdated yet deeply ingrained hero as a leader as a hero, like Bonaparte. He, and it often is still a he, sits at the top, subordinates feed up information up the chain of command, and he and only he has the vision, has all the information to make the best calls. As a result of the increased speed and interconnectedness, leaders at the top are becoming overwhelmed. As the sole decision maker at the top, we're becoming bottlenecks. By the time the decision leaves the leader's desk, it's often an iteration or 2 behind. United CEO Munoz, for example, was ill-informed when he made his first statement about the passenger. What did his first statement say? Anybody remember?
We did the right thing.
We did the right thing. It's the passenger's fault. He was disruptive and basically stirred up a fuss. Something that the videos all over social media clearly disproved. So Munoz was clearly too far removed from the front lines to have good enough information. By the time the statement left his desk, it was too late. The PR disaster was perfect, and the chairmanship, for him personally, suddenly out of reach. Efficiency, which has then been the predominant management paradigm for much of the 20th century, is not enough anymore. It's still necessary. It's not enough. It's quickly being overwhelmed by nimble startups and small group of activists and actors who leverage viral trends. Most of you know her, right? And most of you only know her since last month, by the way, right? So Greta Thunberg is a 16-year-old Swedish teenager, like many of you know. She started to protest by herself in front of the Swedish Parliament building in the spring of 2018. 1 year later, 12 months after she started to protest by herself, in March of this year, an estimated 1.4 million students in 124 countries walked out of school and were protesting climate change. Last month, in September of this year, an estimated 3 million people, including at Amazon in Seattle, for example, walked out of the office, students walking out of school, protesting climate change. And she famously, for those of you who haven't seen that clip, I highly recommend it, famously ripped into world leaders at the United Nations annual meeting in New York, where she was invited. The General Secretary of OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, called Greta and activists like her this summer the greatest threat to the fossil fuel industry. So, I am not here to support Greta's position. Actually, I am, but let's pretend I'm not. Okay? I'm certainly not here to support the petroleum industry. I'm simply talking about this example to show the threats and challenges that organizations today are facing from small, nimble actors. If one Swedish teenager can threaten one of the most cash-loaded and arguably most powerful industries on this planet, what threats and challenges are out there for our businesses, the businesses of our clients, we don't even know yet about? In order to succeed, leaders have to network their organizations, not silo it. What if Munoz, the CEO of United, had better relationships and better information from his social media team? Might that have changed the outcome for everybody? Or better even, would that have prevented the incident in the first place? So clearly, I argue the way we lead has to change in order to meet a changing world. So let me just talk about what I believe needs to happen. I believe organizations need to shift from reductionist efficiency thinking to resilient adaptability. Okay, and I know this is a lot of buzzwords. And from siloed department goal to shared purpose across the organization. From command and control micromanagement to empowered execution at the front line. So let's just briefly take each of these in turn. Resilient adaptability is the result of strengthening relationships between part of a system. A resilient, adaptable organization gets stronger when tested, much like an immune system. An immune system gets stronger when tested. It's like our personal relationships. They get stronger when tested. A resilient, adaptable organization gets stronger when tested, much like an immune system. We must relentlessly communicate and live by example the shared purpose across the organization. This requires us, of course, to answer these very critical questions. What's the one thing we need to execute on extraordinarily well around here in order to win? What's the one thing we need to execute extraordinarily around here to win? Empowered execution. As a leader, this means asking ourselves who in my organization has the best information to make that cool, and then having the humility and confidence to push decision making deep down in the organization to that point where that person, that team has the best information. It means, to speak with General McChrystal, who I'm going to quote in a bit here, we're moving from a hands-on leadership to a eyes-on, hands-off leadership. We live in a world where ego gets attention, but modesty gets results, where arrogance makes headlines, but humility makes a difference. Bill Taylor. So what does this mean for us as leaders? All too often, the advice on how to be a great leader is focused on individual leadership excellence. We all are familiar with the 10 things you need to do to be a great leader. In an increasingly interconnected and complex world, I argue that our job as leaders becomes taking ownership and driving the interpersonal relationships and the team dynamics of our team versus excelling at our individual leadership skills. And no, this we cannot outsource, not to a HR, certainly not to a coach or a consultant. So before I talk about the 5 things that I believe humble leaders need to do in order to deliver against these 3 organizational requirements, let me state one thing. It would be clearly not humble and very pretentious of me to say that humble leadership provides all the answers. Leadership is complex, as we all know, at the best of times, and there's many paths of success to success. However, there is a clear movement building towards humble leadership in the military, as you will see in a second, in academia and in business. And it's not always obvious at the surface, because humble leaders make their teams look like the true heroes, indeed. Let's talk about the 5 things. So we have the golden combo. I, as a humble leader, display the golden combo of humility, confidence, and ambition. I build strong collaborative relationships. I insist, model, and at times force transparent and open communication. I build a team of teams, for those of you who have read the book, and I provide shared experiential learning experiences for my team. Let's take each of them in turn. Humility often gets a bad rap because it's associated with what? Anybody? Weakness, softness. Yeah, all of the above, low confidence. I would argue nothing could be further from the truth. I believe we can lead with humility while being incredibly confident and ambitious. Take, for example, this guy, retired 4-star General Stan McChrystal. Many of you know the book, Team of Teams. I'll talk about that in a second. He runs how many miles a day? 8 miles a day. He sleeps 4 hours a night. He eats 1 meal per day. He doesn't drink. And yet, he had the humility to recognize that the way he structured and led the task force made them lose the war on terror. So let me debunk these two myths quickly here. You can't be both humble and confident. I argue that you actually have to be confident in order to lead with humility. You have to be confident in yourself, confident enough in yourself to push decision-making deep down in the organization. You have to be confident enough to share the spotlight. You have to be confident enough in order to lead with humility. So I would argue it's a prerequisite versus a contradiction. You can't be both. Myth number 2, humble and ambitious. Once again, I argue nothing could be further from the truth. It requires great humility to question what I always thought was true, to question my assumptions, as General McChrystal did, by the way, retired 4-star General McChrystal. He asked himself, what about how I lead makes us lose the war on terror? And then he had the humility to actually make the changes necessary. It requires great ambition and humility to question our assumptions, to question what we always thought was true. And I think as coaches, we would all agree, only by asking those hard questions will we be able to succeed. And striving for success is indeed the very definition of ambition. I love this quote. Few of us are criticized if we faithfully do what has worked many times before, but feeling comfortable or dodging criticism should not be our measure of success. There is likely a place in paradise for people who tried hard, but what really matters is succeeding. If that requires you to change, that's your mission. And yes, it's a bit macho, right? So likely a place in paradise, but also try. But what I absolutely love about this quote is this. If success requires me to change, then that is becoming my mission. If success requires me to change, that is becoming my mission. Here, my Monday morning takeaway for you. What are mine and my clients' preconceived notion about leading with humility? And how might I challenge those preconceived notions? Building collaborative, strong relationships. After 3 months of intense peacekeeping training, we were deployed to Kosovo at the beginning of April of 2017. I was short two key team members, my deputy commander and my warrant officer. Goes without saying that my number 2 is critically important to me, but my warrant officer was equally important. We were stationed as a team, on a team base, totally independent, many miles away from the closest military camp. The warrant officer is responsible for what? What's a warrant officer responsible for? The back of the house. Do we have the right ammunition, the right amount of ammunition? Do we have food? Do we have drinking water? Do we have electricity? And so forth and so forth. The whole back of the house. The warrant officer is absolutely key for the well-being of the team. So I arrived in Kosovo never having met 2 of my key team members. And I knew I needed to build trust and open communication quickly. What did I do? First thing I did, we went for lunch. And I had an in-depth chat about them as a person. I wanted to learn about their backgrounds. And as Frank was saying, we have a national service model in Switzerland. We are all professionals first and soldiers second. So I wanted to know about what they were doing professionally before, their families, their girlfriends, their boyfriends, and so forth. By learning about them as a person and not just the role they were fulfilling for me, the warrant officer, the deputy commander, I was able to build trust quickly. That's what humble leadership is at its core. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Shine and Shine distinguish in their book, Humble Leadership, 3 levels of relationships. Level 1 relationship is a transactional, rule-based relationship. It's a coaching client relationship. Level 2 is a personal, cooperative, trusting relationship. It's what friendships and effective teams have. And level 3 is the emotional, intimate, total mutual commitment, a romantic relationship, or what you have in special operations teams. Our job as humble leaders is to move our relationship from level 1 up towards level 2 and 3. And because leadership, as we all know, is a thinking person sport, we understand what's too formal, too much level 1, and what's too informal, TMI, too much, level 3. The most obvious place to build these relationships is, of course, with our teams, right? The people who work for us. But as we all know, the more senior we become in an organization, the more important it is for us to build this relationship up and down the organization and sideways to key stakeholders. In fact, I would argue the biggest service I as a leader can do for my team is having excellent, and I'm talking excellent relationship with my boss and important key stakeholders. And let me be clear about this one again. Building relationships is never efficient in the short run. It requires a lot of time. It's never efficient, but it is always effective in the long run. When I need the help from that guy over there or that gal over there, and I had that chat, we sat together over a beer or a cup of coffee, then I know I can rely on them. A study of cardiac surgical teams performing open heart surgery, and I love this simple example, showed, check this out, that teams who sat together in the cafeteria and had lunch together versus sitting with their professional peers, the doctors together, the techs together, the nurses together, performed significantly better at this complicated surgery than teams who ate separately. Why is that? We ate together, we sit together, we learn about each other. I then feel empowered as the technician number 12 to speak up when I see something which the chief surgeon might have overlooked. And I feel okay then to actually speak up and bring up my concern. David is a senior spine surgeon at the Children's Hospital. He relies on a large team when performing his surgery. When asked how he builds trust, he says, I first pick the people based on their competence. And then, you see a theme here, I take them for lunch. We like to eat. Why? By doing something very humane and non-hierarchical together, we are quickly able to reduce hierarchical distance. However, hospital policy changed. David, the spine surgeon, didn't have an assigned team anymore. So he needed to build trust and relationships quickly with a rotating team of strangers. He evolved the pre-required pre-op checklist into a relationship-building cooperative process. He asked his chief OR nurse, instead of hurrying through each checklist item, to go through each item slowly and deliberately. He looked at each person. At Trisha, he looked at each person with body language, facial expression that invited comments, questions, concerns. So by going through the pre-op checklist in a cooperative, collaborative, respectful way, he created better team cohesion, better team, and what's the most important outcome that needed to improve? The patient's outcome, right? Once again, people felt empowered and okay to speak up when they saw something or caught something that the collective might have missed.